What's up, guys? Chris Fluck here. Chris Fluck Podcast, episode 29. Today, we are talking about one of the best books I've read this year. Maybe one of the all-time greats, GOATs. We got a possible greatest of all time situation here. Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. We're actually going to tap into two of his writings. Brave New World first, and then Brave New World Revisited second. But first, this book was written in 1931. It was written in the shadow of World War I, Wall Street crash, the flu pandemic of 1918, where 3 to 6% of the population, I believe it was a Spanish flu virus, wiped out 3 to 6% of the population. Huxley, he was concerned with the all-powerful elite making all the decisions. This is in 1932. We're almost 100 years later, and these conversations are still happening. He predicted how technology, was going to be affecting our day-to-day lives, and how the elite kind of controls the technology, and they can control the decision-making, the advertising, the reality-type television. Those people in power are the ones that are kind of controlling what we consume. He predicted things with drug use, genetic engineering, euthanasia, all of that, topics that are being brought up still today, 2019. He talked about big business, people sacrificing privacy, spying on friends, society controlled by enforced happiness. In this book, which we will get into, people are consuming a certain drug to keep them happy. Kind of goes on today as well. If they don't oblige, don't follow the rules, they get sent off to another place. So it's kind of crazy, and it's time to get into this thing. All right. So Brave New World. I just wanted to hit this one because I do think it's important. We're going to touch on some quotes from the book. We're going to touch on some things, just kind of my own personal opinions on the matter. If anybody cares to know what Chris Fluck is thinking, I will let you know. So, in the light, basically, it's back. Now we're hitting the book. It kind of starts off. It kind of describes what they call the Volkanovsky process. It's a principle of mass production, at least applied to biology. So what they're doing in this book is they are using laboratory. They're stipulating different genes, whatnot, to kind of create a certain kind of person. It's all predestined, and then once that person is born, they're all conditioned. So it's like, hey, this is Chris Fluck. We're going to make him a field worker. So they're just going to use the genetic makeup of a previous field worker, say, and kind of create the ideal candidate for that. And then when I am born, they're just going to condition me to be the greatest field worker ever. So back to the book. We also predestine and condition. We decant our babies as socialized human beings, as future sewage workers or future world controllers. So from the get-go, they're deciding what this person's path is going to be. And you don't even have a choice in the process. The parent doesn't have a choice. Probably your parents' makeup is part of the reason into it. Now we're in the book again. The Epsilon mind. The Epsilon is just a part of one of their creators, or one of their characters in their world that they create. The Epsilon mind was mature at 10. The Epsilon body was not fit to work till 18. Long years of superfluous and wasteful immaturity. If the physical development could be speeded up till it was as quick as, say, a cow's, what an enormous saving to the community. So now they're looking at this problem that they have where, the mind is not developing as fast as the body. So in this book, in the Brave New World, they're trying to get that body up to speed to just kind of maximize production across the board. So always at work, I guess these individuals are to try to make their society as clean and as productive as possible. Back to the book here. Books and loud noises, flowers and electric shocks. Already in the infant mind, these couples were compromisingly linked. And after 200 repetitions of the same or a similar lesson would be wedded indissolubly. Huxley's killing me with some of these words. What man has joined nature is powerless to put asunder. They'll grow up with what psychologists used to call an instinctive hatred of books and flowers, reflexes unalterably conditioned. They'll be safe from books and botany all their lives. So, just like Pavlov conditioned the dogs that when that bell rang, they were going to salivate, these people are conditioning the people in their little world, in their Brave New World, to be instinctively interested in certain things. A love of nature keeps no factories busy. It was decided to abolish the love of nature, at any rate among the lower classes, to abolish the love of nature. So they're looking at their productivity and they're like, you know what? This person wants to go out there and sniff some flowers. That person is not going to help our society exceed. Bam, get rid of them. Reminds me of like this whole eugenic movement. At the one end of the spectrum was kind of what Hitler did in Germany. On this side, on a more mild state of the spectrum, there was people in the 20s. You know, there was a president, Margaret Sanger, the person that I think created Planned Parenthood, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, they were eugenicists, where they were like, we only want our top level people, those 1%. Why don't we just have those individuals reproduce and not the bottom half of the of society? Selective breeding, kind of crazy, not really into it, but this book kind of taps into that, and this is stuff that ended up going on in life, and still probably does today. Obviously, no, it definitely does today. No, probably. Back to the book. Think of water under pressure in a pipe. I pierced it once, what a jet. He pierced it 20 times. There were 20 piddling little fountains. So the more you pierce something, the less powerful that thing becomes. You know, I think this type of thing could be applied. I don't know if this is what he meant by it in the book, but I always think about it, you know, hearing that one message from somebody could really change your life, where like 20 other people that you don't really value, or at just that point in time in your life that you're really not interested in hearing it, that message doesn't really come through too strong. But then there's that one person, that one instinct, or not instinct, that one incident where like that message just hits you and it comes home and it comes pouring out of that pipe hard, man. Like that's kind of what came to my mind when I read that quote. You know, how strong that stream can be if delivered by the right person at the right time. Back to the book. After all, everyone belongs to everyone else. So in this book, you know, these physical relationships, these sexual relationships, everybody was everybody's. There was no, you know, there was no love in this book between two individuals. And if there was, it got hairy. There was no feelings. Some people might like that idea, but, you know, others don't, because then you don't really feel any strong emotions on one end of the spectrum. Or I guess you don't feel strong emotions on the other end of the spectrum too. One way they condition these people, we're going back to the book here, 62,400 repetitions make one truth. They hammer that into people's heads from the get-go, from a young age. You know, you see what's going on in some of these countries like North Korea, and in the schools they're hammering people, they're hammering these kids with information, propaganda that supports their cause. I mean, that's what Huxley's writing about here. This was going on, and this is from 1930s, guys. Back to the book. 800 simple lifers mowed down by machine guns at Golden Greens. Then came the famous British Museum massacre. 2,000 cultured fans gassed with dichlorethyl sulfide. Is this not the prediction of mass shootings and some of these mass homicides, mass murders that are going on right here? I mean, mowed down by machine guns at an incident, man. We're getting these stories every month in the news, it seems like, where something's going on in this country, where people are getting mowed down. Huxley was talking about it then. You know, that was the thing with this book, where he didn't expect this stuff to happen in his lifetime. Some of it did, which is what we're going to talk about in A Brave New World Revisited. He expected this to be hundreds of years away, not happening within the next century. So it's like this the way that things are compounding and speeding up over time here is just crazy. All right, back to the book. Yes, everybody's happy now, echoed Lenina. They had heard the words repeated 150 times every night for 12 years. Everybody's happy. Brainwashed situation. Saying this stuff every night. Crazy. Years of intensive hypnopedia. And from 12 to 7, Malthusian drills 3 times a week had made the taking of these precautions almost as automatic and inevitable as blinking. Basic conditioning with this stuff. Just keep hammering drills into people's heads, have them repeat phrases over and over again. You could see his theme here with this book, right? Conditioning, brainwash, propaganda, keep pumping things into people's brains. Not just this, back to the book, not just the cell in the social body. How can you talk like that about not wanting to be part of the social body? So there's a character in this book that really didn't like what was going on, and he was born of one parent that was in this society and one that was outside of this society. No, both were born in the society, but one was raised in a different society. This person was raised as a savage, as a warrior, as an animal, kind of like a Native American that you would think historically in our country, how people viewed them back in the day. So he gets back to this area and he doesn't understand it, and he doesn't want to take part in this stuff. He doesn't want to be just a cell in the body. He wants to be more, and he wants to kind of fight against the machine a little bit. I like that kind of terminology, fight against the machine. Never put off till tomorrow the fun you can have today. 200 repetitions twice a week from 14 to 16 and a half. So now that was just another example of what they were doing, brainwashing individuals. When the individual feels, the community reels. This is what I was talking about with kind of their free love motivation back in the day here in this book. They didn't want these feelings to come through because that's going to affect the efficiency and affect the relationships that are involved in their machine. So there was no feelings. There was no feelings allowed. You couldn't care for an individual on any level, really. There was no family. You didn't have a mother. You didn't have a father. You were born. You were created in a lab. Siblings didn't exist. Lovers didn't exist. And the moment they did exist, you might end up getting yourself banished to the island. We gave them transfusion of young blood. There's these rumors going on these days where a lot of wealthy people, I don't know if it's Silicon Valley, I think Peter Thiel is one of the names that I remember seeing, and I think he kind of shot it down saying, like, I'm not doing this. But anyway, people infusing young blood into their body. There's stories back in the day of a woman that I think she was a murderer, but would like bathe in the bath of young blood. She was like some royal, I forget what her name, but she had one of those infamous names. But yeah, this bathing in young blood, infusing young blood into your body, thinking it's going to help you out. I don't know what the research is on this right now, but does it actually do anything? Don't know. He's talking about it in 1930 though, so obviously this was something that he saw coming. Back to the book. His intellectual eminence carries with it corresponding moral responsibilities. The greater a man's talents, the greater his power to lead astray. It is better that one should suffer than that many should be corrupted. Intellectual eminence. So like the more you learn, the more potential you have to kind of speak out against the machine and fight against the machine and say, this is irrational, this is stupid. Why are we letting them do this? Why are we letting these people spy on us? Why are we letting this company control the content that we get? Some companies are actually going out there and kind of fighting this a little bit and doing things on their own. Musicians recording their own music, they don't want people controlling what they're doing. The more they learn and the more that they kind of understand what's going on out there, the more they're like, this is not fair, I'm fighting against this thing. Huxley was hitting on it back in the day. Do you want to be free and men? Don't you even understand what manhood and freedom are? This is the savage trying to talk to these people, trying to incite some sort of emotion, some sort of feeling in these people. They didn't even understand what it was to be a human. They were just a cog in the machine, just kind of punching away. And, if it didn't, like, any kind of fighting against it, obviously there was repercussions, but they didn't even get to that point just because they were so conditioned and so brainwashed to not even speak out against it. And if they did feel like speaking out, they might have been drugged, or if they didn't feel happy about a certain case, they would just pop some of these somas that they took in this book. Back to the book here. The policemen pushed him out of the way and got on with their work. 3 men were spraying machines, buckled to their shoulders, pumped thick clouds of soma vapor into the air. 2 more were busy around the portable synthetic music box, carrying water pistols charged with powerful anesthetic. 4 others had pushed their way into the crowd and were methodically laying out, squirt by squirt, the more ferocious of the fighters. So this is like their crowd control situation. There was a little bit of an inciting of a riot or people getting riled up, and they just sprayed them, man. Not with guns, not with any kind of fake bullets. They sprayed them with an anesthetic. They sprayed them with soma, which made people happy, chilled them out, and that was that. A safe method, might see that method going on. I'm not up on my crowd control situation techniques. Now they're spraying gas and whatnot into certain crowds. This is more to make them docile. The Brave New World, they were just trying to make everybody docile and chill out a little bit. All right, back to the book. You can't make Flivvers without steel, and you can't make tragedies without social instability. The world's stable now. People are happy, they get what they want, and they never want what they can't get. They're well off, they're safe, they're never ill, they're not afraid of death. They're blissfully ignorant of passion and old age. They're plagued with no mothers or fathers. They've got no wives or children or lovers to feel strongly about. They're so conditioned that they practically can't help behaving as they ought to behave, and if anything should go wrong, there's Soma. Soma was the drug of choice for these guys to incite and create happiness. So this is it, man. It's like, this is pretty much the book wrapped up in a nutshell. People are just kind of, they're made to not feel, obviously. People are stable, they're happy. It's like fake happiness, right? People in this day and age where they get a job and they get to go and do what they want to do, and they could create a living and take care of their family financially and yada, yada, yada. But do they really have happiness? And I think that's kind of what this book is touching on. All of these people in this book are just kind of cogs in a machine. And yes, they're happy in theory, but they're also ignorant. They don't understand that there's more to life. And I think that kind of happens to us still as human beings. We're like, just because, just because things are good and things are okay doesn't mean that we should stop to strive for more, and to understand that there is more out there, and to see that person that is doing some cool stuff and some happy things and having these awesome relationships. It's like we become almost a little bit envious of that. But instead of acting and trying to find that, we just kind of accept our role and accept our part in the machine here and don't address it, which stinks. But it does happen. It's almost human nature. Like, this book has different hierarchies of people. It's almost like there's different hierarchies of people in life, where some people kind of accept their fate, say, this is it, this is what I'm going to be doing, this is my lot, and they just kind of stay there and they never want to advance. And then there's those that keep wanting to advance. There's people born with advantages and there's people born with disadvantages, but it's all about kind of what you do after you are born that really matters, and ends up, there's people born with advantage that end up down here, and then vice versa as well. So it's what you make of it all, man. Back to the book. It's an absurdity. An alpha conditioned man will go mad if he had to do epsilon semi-moron work. Go mad or start smashing things up. Alphas can be completely socialized, but only on condition that you make them do alpha work. Only an epsilon can be expected to make epsilon sacrifices, for the good reason that for him, they aren't sacrifices. They're the line of least resistance. His conditioning has laid down rails along which he's got to run. He can't help himself. He's foredoomed. So in this book, it's like, hey, man, we got the rails laid out. This is the path you're supposed to follow. Somebody that, like I talked about, had one of these advantages up here, we can't make that person do this semi-moron work. They would go mad. They would start smashing things. But I don't think that's the case. I think there's a lot of talented. I just heard this story about this boxer. 1979, James Scott, I believe. He's in Rahway State Prison in New Jersey. He fought 9 fights inside of prison. He was a number 2 contender for the light heavyweight title. HBO, CBS, NBC, they brought their cameras to the state prison, and this guy fought inside the prison. Robbery, murder charges, right? This man got all these different college education stuff and started coaching and training kids once he got parole in 2005. But at that point in time, he was just trying to help mold the young. So while he was in prison, he talked about the unmined talent, the unmined gold that is in every prison system. And it's like going back to this accepting of the roles that we have. You don't have to accept the roles. Your situation now is what it is, but it's your job to kind of make it better. So if you are one of these people that are born, you don't accept it, man. Just like you might have been dealt a tough hand, but you could always kind of make tomorrow better. And the opposite is true too. You might have been dealt a good hand, and that doesn't mean that you won't end up doing some of this low-level work. But and the reason that you are doing that is probably potentially because of your mindset. Back to the book. The optimal population is modeled on the iceberg. 8/9 below the waterline, 1/9 above it. When I see this, I think about hard work and what people have to do where nobody sees all that work. It's like overnight success. Overnight success that it took 12 years to get you there, right? Nobody sees those 12 years of preparation. All they see is like, whoa, this comic busts on the scene and he's a star. Nobody saw him doing shows every night, sleeping in his car, traveling on the road overnight just to make ends meet. Same with some actors, same with some football players, same with some boxer. Can't even afford to pay his rent, but he's still fighting and trying to make a living for his family. Happiness is a hard master, particularly other people's happiness. Like that one. Happiness is a hard master. It's hard to listen to that. It's hard to follow that sometimes. I don't know what it is about us as humans, but we want to fight it, and I don't understand it. We don't want to change. Every change is a menace to stability. So you have homeostasis, right? That's where you are right now in this current condition. Any kind of change you make is a menace to that homeostasis, to that stability. Scary, right? But we need to make change in life, right? That's the whole point of life. Back to the book. People still went on talking about truth and beauty as though they were sovereign goods, right up to the time of the 9 Years' War. That made them change their tune, all right. What's the point of truth or beauty or knowledge when the anthrax bombs are popping all around you? Interesting take on that. A lot of people, talked about that book Tribe in the past multiple times, but it's like the opposite actually happens when these tough times are happening. People do kind of come together, and that community kind of comes. People are there for each other. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are in this hierarchy. You're all the same. You're all getting bombed that day, so you have to stick together. You have to band together, and you have to create some sort of community. Huxley, I guess that's one area that Huxley didn't kind of predict it. They learned that in World War II, bombing Germany bombing Britain. Instead of them smashing Britain, whatever it was, 60 days in a row, instead of demoralizing them, it brought them all together, made them fight harder. And then the inverse was true too, when the roles reversed and we started hammering Germany, Berlin, and all these wherever else that the Allied forces were bombing. It brought them together too. I think it kind of happened with the Japanese as well. They had no quit in their fight after we were hammering them with bombs and whatnot. Then it led to the point that they did have to drop some nasty bombs on them, man. Back to the book. Civilization has absolutely no need of nobility or heroism. These things are symptoms of political inefficiency. They did not want anybody standing out necessarily or taking a stand or fighting for the people. They want to know Martin Luther Kings. They want to know founding fathers. They want to know give me liberty or give me death situations. They wanted everybody to fall in line, man. And if ever, by some unlucky chance, anything unpleasant should somehow happen, why? There's always someone to give you holiday from the facts. Holiday from the facts, right? That's why people drink. That's why people get involved in narcotics. That's why people are on some of these SSRIs, some anti-anxiety drugs, some antidepressants. It's a holiday from the facts. It's not actually addressing the facts. It's not addressing reality. It's just kind of giving you a short break from it. I'm not against this stuff, guys. Some people do need it, right? It does help some people. But I'm just repeating what Huxley said, and it does go on. It's why you see some people want to escape. Some people might even escape into television and watch shows mindlessly for hours on end. It's kind of all the same. People just want an escape from reality when really the plan should be to let's try to address reality to kind of optimize that. Back to the book. Whether 'tis better in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing and end them. But you don't do either, neither suffer nor oppose. You just abolish the slings and arrows. It's too easy. Taking the easy way out. What is the easiest thing to do? Not to do it, right? You have to have a tough conversation with a loved one. You have two choices. You have that tough conversation and deal with the consequences, or you don't. And then you have to live with that. You put your slings and arrows down and you just kind of live day to day. That's where that homeostasis is, man. That's where that stability is. And you're not going to advance in life if you don't pick up those slings and arrows at times. And take a stand, speak up, do your things, all that good stuff, man. And then this is it. Just to kind of finish up here, I think this was a perfect conclusion to Brave New World. And then we're going to get into Brave New World Revisited. We prefer to do things comfortably. But I don't want comfort. I want God. I want poetry. I want real danger. I want freedom. I want goodness. I want sin. In fact, you're claiming the right to be unhappy. All right then, said the savage defiantly. I'm claiming the right to be unhappy. Not to mention the right to grow old and ugly and impotent. The right to have syphilis and cancer. The right to have too little to eat. The right to be lousy. The right to live in constant apprehension of what may happen tomorrow. The right to catch typhoid. the right to be tortured by unspeakable pains of every kind. There was a long silence. I claim them all, said the savage at last. That's truly what living is. All of these things that he wants, this society in the Brave New World is trying to fight against that. They're trying to eliminate any kind of free thinking. They're trying to eliminate the ugliness of society. They want everybody to look good and be pretty and all that stuff. They will create a medicine for anything. The right to be lousy. You're not allowed to be lousy in their society. The right to live in constant apprehension of what may happen tomorrow. Living in this predictable life, you probably know what's going to happen for like 99% of the time. The right to catch typhoid, the right to be tortured by unspeakable pains of every kind. All of these things sound so terrible, but at least he wants the right to have that, And I think that's kind of what the whole point is of this book, and that's the whole point of society in general. We want to have the freedom, and we want to have the right to do anything that we want to do, whether for good or for bad. You can't appreciate the good stuff without the bad sometimes, and like the old quote says that I love to say, we need the darkness. Embrace the darkness, man, because it's out there, and there's nothing we could do about it. So, that's Brave New World in a nutshell. Basically, the premise is this. A society controlled by the controller. There's a world controller, and the people don't have much say in what they do. They're born a certain way. They're conditioned to act a certain way, and that's that. They're created in a lab. There are no feelings. There's no love. There's none of that stuff. There's no getting sick. There's no being unhappy. There's no being depressed. There's drugs for all that stuff. Utopian society, whatever you want to call it. That's what Huxley talked about in 1931. Now, we're getting on to the crazy book, Brave New World Revisited. All right, so I got all kinds of drinks going on here, guys. I need a quick little rinse off. Same guy, Aldous Huxley. Great writer. Interesting writer, interesting man, great life story if you read about him at all. Born, with all the advantages in the world, becomes a writer, writes about the things that nobody wants to touch. The Doors of Perception, I think, was one of his books where he talked about his use of mescaline, which I think is an active ingredient in peyote, LSD type stuff, mushrooms, I think that's psilocybin. The Doors, the band, took their name from that book, The Doors of Perception. But anyway, not afraid to kind of dabble with some different stuff and write about it, which is cool. But anyway, now we're getting into Brave New World Revisited. 1931, he wrote that. This book, I believe, was written in 1952 or 1953. So he opens up here. In 1931, when Brave New World was being written, I was convinced that there was still plenty of time. The completely organized society, the scientific caste system, the abolish of free will by methodical conditioning, the servitude made acceptable by regular doses of chemically induced happiness, the orthodoxies drummed in by nightly courses of sleep teaching. These things were coming, all right, but not in my time, not even in the time of my grandchildren. Not so fast, my friend, because they're coming. But even, back to the book, but even in these countries that have a tradition of democratic government, this freedom and even the desire for this freedom seem to be on the wane. This is in the 50s, man. He's saying the freedom, the people don't want that freedom as much anymore. They kind of want to be controlled. They kind of want to be told what to do. And I can't help but think about how worse it is now in 2019 than when he wrote this in the 50s. All right. In the light of what we have recently learned about animal behavior in general and human behavior in particular, it has become clear that control through the punishment of undesirable behavior is less effective in the long run than control through reinforcement of desirable behavior by rewards, and that government through terror works on the whole less well than government through non-violent manipulation of the environment and of the thoughts and feelings of individual men, women, and children. Punishment temporarily puts a stop to undesirable behavior, but does not permanently reduce the victim's tendency to indulge in it. So, listening to Oprah talk to Malcolm Gladwell, she had this thing, I don't know, she was telling people, stop spanking your children. And some woman came up to her in a store, and Oprah's just saying it consistently over and over again throughout her years and when she was first starting her show. This woman came up and was like, Oprah, I have to tell you, you changed my life with my son. I used to spank him all the time, And I'm hearing you say, don't spank your children. I'm like, how am I supposed to get them to behave well if I don't spank them? She stopped spanking them. She started treating them a little bit more like a human being, not like a little kid that's in trouble all the time. And the kid stopped acting out in that behavior. And it changed that woman's relationship with her child. So that one person, it's always like, if you could change the world, start with yourself, right? You guys heard that quote. That one person decided, I'm going to change my world, and I'm going to try to create a better relationship for my son, for myself and my son even. And she started gave some positive feedback, positive rewards, as opposed to just constantly just spanking them, yelling at them, putting them in timeout, all that stuff. And it turned out to be such a great thing. And he's applying that on the larger level too, with governments, where people that are governed through fear, in the long run, just not good. Short term, maybe you could get people in line, but over time, people just get sick and tired of it, and then they will revolt, and they will be done with it. In the upper levels of the Soviet hierarchical society, the reinforcement of desirable behavior has begun to replace this older methods of control through punishment of undesirable behavior. Engineers and scientists, teachers and administrators are handsomely paid for good work and so moderately taxed that they are under a constant incentive to do better and so be more highly rewarded. In certain areas, they are at liberty to think and do more or less what they want. Punishment awaits them only when they stray beyond their prescribed limits into the realms of ideology and politics. So in the Soviet Union, they were allowed to explore these different ideas so long as it fit into their mold of society, kind of what Brave New World was. They allowed, they had these set rules, set regiments. Once you strayed from that, we've got issues. The Soviet Union did that as well here, where they would reward you and they would make you feel great, but that one moment that you kind of spoke out against politics or anything else, they might be dropping the hammer on you, and the hammer might have been death. So it kind of was the best of both there, where there was some positive reinforcement. They tried to get people to feel good, but it was really just all a scam, and they were still operating under terror, basically. The problem of rapidly increasing numbers this is going back to the book, sorry. The problem of rapidly increasing numbers in relation to natural resources, to social stability, and to the well-being of individuals. This is now the central problem of mankind, and it will remain the problem certainly for another century and perhaps for several centuries thereafter. So he's kind of thinking now that this overpopulation situation, obviously we're going to diminish resources, but in addition to that, it's going to affect society. We're going to have more people. Instead of being spread out, they're going to be in tighter quarters. They're going to be on top of each other. The relationships change there, man. That might have a role in how we are acting as humans now, where everybody knows everybody, and everybody's on top of each other, and everybody has access to everybody. You could communicate to somebody like that. And I don't know if that's good on one end and not good on the other end. In his mindset, in this time in the 1950s, he was concerned about it for a good reason. Back to the book. And even if at some future date emigration to Mars should become feasible, even if any considerable number of men and women were desperate enough to choose a new life under conditions comparable to those prevailing on a mountain twice as high as Mount Everest, what difference would that make? In the course of the last 4 centuries, quite a number of people sailed from the old world to the new, but neither their departure nor their returning flow of food and raw materials could solve the problems of the old world. So no matter what we do, Elon Musk is talking about going to Mars. Huxley was talking about it in the 50s. No matter what we do, we're not going to escape the problems that face humanity here, just by changing location. It's like that person that says, oh, I'm getting into trouble, I keep drinking, I'm just going to change where I live and change the environment. It doesn't always work that way, It doesn't address the problems. It doesn't address the things that led to your abuse of alcohol or drugs. It doesn't lead to, you're a criminal in Pennsylvania, I'm going to move to Florida. Good luck there. Just because you get some warm weather doesn't mean that you're still not going to act on some of these immoral thoughts that you have. So, back to the book then. When human beings are tempted too enticingly or too long, they generally yield. Talked about this in the past and other stuff where it's like, if there's constant exposure to temptation, it's hard to fight that. Human beings yield, and it's sad and it's unfortunate, and a lot of terrible things happen because of that, but I guess it is human nature. If Huxley's talking about it in the 50s, it's still present. It was present before that point in time, and it's present still today. And it's hard to say, like, oh, that's BS, have a backbone, fight the fight, yada, yada, yada. But over time, man, circumstances, situations, who knows, you're going to yield. You could potentially yield. And if everything kind of comes in line like the perfect storm, it could get you, no matter what your mindset is now. I've done things that I thought I would never do years ago. But then when you start to try to look at it from a bigger picture, it's like, Jesus, this could have been a lot worse. Or, Jesus, I can't believe I did that. Or, Jesus, I could have been that guy that, made a mistake and drove onto the interstate the wrong way and freaking died with a head-on collision. Like, that could have happened to me. It could have happened to anybody, and it's just all making that one bad decision. Overpopulation leads to economic insecurity and social unrest. Unrest and insecurity lead to more control by central government and an increase of their power. So, economic insecurity and social unrest. The United States is pretty populated, and right now in this moment in time, we're trying to shut the borders down. Let's not let anybody in. We're kind of blaming outsiders for our internal problems, and I don't think that is necessarily the case. Does it help and does it play a role? Yes, but for the reasons that Huxley says here, is that it creates this mindset of insecurity and creates this mindset of unrest. It's not that person from a different country creates insecurity and unrest. It's just in that individual mind. In my mind, oh, this neighbor's coming in here. He's moving into my territory. Gym's opening up next door. It's going to create some insecurity in myself, but I create that in my mind. It's not their fault. They're just trying to get theirs as well. Just like my descendants try to get theirs in this country. People coming in right now, they're just trying to get theirs and try to live a better life. It's not their fault that they're taking my job. I just need to find a better job or do a better job or create a new skill. That's kind of how I look at it. And if that doesn't happen, we have unrest, we have insecurity, and then because of that unrest and insecurity, we look for the higher powers, the government, to come in and kind of help us, and then we're going to support that stuff. So it's more control by the central government and increase of the central government's power. Not ideal, I don't think so. This is it. This is Huxley, going back to the book. The United States is not at present an overpopulated country. This is 1950s. If, however, the population continues to increase at the present rate, which is higher than than of India's increase, though happily a good deal lower than the rate now current in Mexico or Guatemala, the problem of numbers in relation to available resources might well become troublesome by the beginning of the 21st century. So, I'm no expert in Mexico or Guatemala, but I did read a book about drugs and some of the life that is just the conditions that people are living in down there. That is probably playing a role in their crime rate and their social unrest and their instability. They had these huge birth rates that were totally destroying, crushing the death rates. Just more people being born than dying, basically, and it kind of led to these awful conditions. In the United States, we're financially, I think, in a position to not let that happen, but it doesn't mean that it won't happen. So, back to the book here. In the brave new world of my fantasy, eugenics and dysgenics were practiced systematically. In one set of bottles, biologically superior ova, fertilized by biologically superior sperm, were given the best possible prenatal treatment and were finally decanted as betas, alphas, and alpha pluses. In another, much more numerous set of bottles, biologically inferior ova, fertilized by biologically inferior sperm, were subjected to the Volkanovsky process, which was 96 identical twins out of a single egg. So 96 identical twins, right? And treated prenatally with alcohol and other protein poisons. The creatures finally decanted were almost subhuman, but they were capable of performing unskilled work and, when properly conditioned, detentioned by free and frequent access to the opposite sex, constantly distracted by gratuitous entertainment, and reinforced in their good behavior patterns by daily doses of soma, would be counted on to give no trouble to their superiors. So they were just creating superior and inferior people in labs, conditioning them, poisoning them, creating their own world, basically before they were even born or before even given the ability to decide for themselves. Going back to the book here, this is a Dr. D.H. Shelton, who was a eugenicist and also created the somatotype, which is like, we talked about it before in the sense of mesomorph, endomorph, ectomorph, just different body types in people. But this guy says, under conditions that are both soft and unregulated, our best stock tends to be outbred by stock that is inferior to it in every respect. So being a eugenicist, he said the inferior stock, we need to slow that down and let our superior stock, as humans, which is like, he sounds like he's dealing with cattle here, the superior stock, they need to breed more. Crazy. But that was the process, man. That's what they were thinking at the time. All right, here's a question I asked some high school kids because they were talking about something and it was a little bit over their head. It was probably a little bit too much, but stamp out malaria, right, with a DDT, say. So stamp out malaria in 2 or 3 years, save hundreds of thousands of lives. This is obviously good, but the hundreds of thousands of human beings thus saved and the millions whom they beget and bring to birth cannot be adequately clothed, housed, educated, or even fed out of the island's available resources. Quick death by malaria has been abolished, but life made miserable by undernourishment and overcrowding is now the rule, and slow death by outright starvation threatens ever greater numbers. So, you save them from malaria, but you introduce them to a life of hunger, starvation, malnourishment, all that stuff. What do you do? I mean, obviously the stamping out of malaria is great, getting rid of it is great, but then it's like, what's the result here? More loss of resources and all that stuff. All right. To parody the words of Winston Churchill, never have so many been manipulated so much by so few. Interesting. It's pretty spot on, man, and it's even worse today. Philosopher / psychiatrist Dr. Erich Fromm, our contemporary Western society, in spite of its material, intellectual, and political progress, is increasingly less conducive to mental health and tends to undermine the inner security, happiness, reason, and the capacity for love for the individual. It tends to turn him into an automaton who pays for his human failure with increasing mental sickness and with despair hidden under the frantic drive for work and so-called pleasure. So all of it's fake, it's kind of, having this great job, being happy, saying we're happy, acting happy. It's not true happiness in the sense of actually what we feel inside. We're really just an automaton. We're really going through the motions. All the stuff that Huxley was scared of happening when he wrote Brave New World is kind of happening, which is nuts. So, sorry, there was a bug on the blocking the camera there. Sorry for swatting you. Back to the book. Man is not made to be an automation, and if he becomes one, the basis for mental health is destroyed. Obvious. It's out there. It's worse now. Don't let your life become automated, man. Organization is indispensable. For liberty arises and has meaning only within a self-regulating community of freely cooperating individuals. But though indispensable, organization can also be fatal. Too much organization transforms men and women into automata, suffocates the creative spirit, and abolishes the very possibility of freedom. As usual, the only safe course is in the middle, between the extremes of laissez-faire at one end and of the scale and of total control at the other. So in government, it seems that once you have that laissez-faire, political leader, then the exact opposite is going to come to power. You have a Democrat in power for a couple years, Republicans are going to get in, and vice versa. But really what we need is something in the middle, man. We need some sort of balance. But life, back to the book, but life in large cities is not conducive to mental health. I think we talked about it already, it's just not. People are angry. You look at the Northeast here, New York, New Jersey, Boston. People are just pissed all the time, man. And it's like everybody's living on top of each other. People are running from one spot to the next. Everybody's in a hurry. There's traffic, there's car horns, all this other crap going on. Yeah, it doesn't make life fun, man. And I think it kind of wears us out. Back to the book. Today, according to a writer on the Harvard Business Review, remember this is 1950s, the wife of the man who was trying to live up to the ideal proposed by the social ethic, in quotes here, must not demand too much of her husband's time and interest. Because of his single-mindedness, concentration on his job, even his sexual activity must be relegated to a secondary place. So we're at a spot here in the 50s, I think it's worse now, where people, like good positive relationships, are now being accepted just because over the years it's kind of what they turn into. The man works too much. It's changing a bit. I don't want to say women don't work because they do at high levels, but just the stereotype is what I'm talking about. The man works 9 to 5. Say I got a friend, he has to drive an hour to work 9 hours, drive an hour home. That's 11 hours. He's away, right? He has a child. The child's going to be awake for 14 hours. When does that man get to spend time with his child? 3 hours. When does that man, in addition to that, get to spend time with his wife or his significant other? 1, 2, 3 hours? Who knows? That's why relationships are getting affected by it. And it kind of sucks. So you got to kind of figure out what the hell's your motivation in life. Is it going to be to get that job and keep climbing the corporate ladder? Or is it just going to try to build some great positive relationships? Back to the book. Thomas Jefferson quote, "The doctrines of Europe were that men in numerous associations cannot be restrained within the limit of order and justice, except by forces physical and moral wielded over them by authorities independent of their will. We, the founders of the new American democracy, believe that man was a rational animal, endowed by nature with rights and with an innate sense of justice, and that he could be restrained from wrong and protected in right by moderate powers, confided to persons of his own choice, and held to their duties by dependence on his own will. Given a fair chance, this is not Jefferson, this is just Huxley talking now. Given a fair chance, human beings can govern themselves, and govern themselves better, though perhaps with less mechanical efficiency than they can be governed by authorities independent of their will." So, in a brave new world, mechanical efficiency was the goal, right? And what did that lead to? People drugged up, people not really being truly happy, things of that nature. Huxley and myself believe that people can handle this stuff, man. They could govern themselves, they could take care of themselves, and then as a whole, as society, we're going to be happier, healthier. In the light, back to the book, in the light of recent history, it would be foolish to suppose that this sort of thing cannot happen again. It can, and no doubt it will. Not understanding history, not knowing history, people ask, why do I know that? I don't know. I just do because I'm scared it might repeat itself. I could read a story about somebody else, see how it happened to him, kind of apply that to my life, where it's like everybody's my teacher. That's kind of how I view things. In history, if these kids say that you're not learning about certain things that happen in history, in 10 years from now, that person could come to power somewhere, and they might do the same exact thing. The cycle might continue. You have to understand history. You have to know history in order to understand what our future holds. Back to the book. There are two kinds of propaganda: rational propaganda in favor of action that is consonant with the enlightenment of self, with the enlightened self-interest of those who make it, and to those whom it is addressed, and non-rational propaganda that is not consonant with anybody's enlightened self-interest, but is dictated by and appeals to passion. So you got two types of propaganda, all right? One, self-interest, and then one by passion. Think about some of these countries. Think about some of these leaders that have been able to incite, feelings and emotion. In John Dewey's words, "A renewal of faith in common human nature, in its potentialities in general, and in its power in particular to respond to reason and truth, is a sure bulwark against totalitarianism than a demonstration of material success or devout worship of special legal or political forms. The power to respond to reason and truth exists in all of us, but so, unfortunately, does the tendency to respond to unreason and falsehood, particularly in those cases where the falsehood evokes some enjoyable emotion or where the appeal to unreason strikes some answering chord in the primitive subhuman depths of our being. Some of this propaganda, some of the stuff that does incite emotion, gets us to move faster and quicker than, say, rational thought. Mass communication, in a word, is neither good nor bad. It is simply a force, and like any force, it can be used either well or ill. What we're talking about here. It's great that we have access. We could talk to somebody like that if we needed to, but it's also negative, man. It also kind of turns us into slaves to our phone, slaves to our text messages and whatnot. Back to the book. In the totalitarian East, there is political censorship, and the media of mass communication are controlled by the state. In the democratic West, there is economic censorship, and the media of mass communication are controlled by members of the power elite. People with the money are the people that are able to put the ads on the television. They're able to control what you see, right? That's what he's talking about. In the East, it is just those dictatorships, the Chinese government, the North Korean government, just not even allowing it at all. Chinese students coming over here to Lehigh, say, and you get to talk to them, they're like, they don't even have Google, crazy. In Brave New World, nonstop distractions of the most fascinating nature are deliberately used as instruments of policy for the purpose of preventing people from paying too much attention to the realities of the social and political situation. Distractions are everywhere, And because of those distractions, they're taking our minds to these things and not really focusing on the real issues. It happens in politics. It happened with, say, one side of the presidential party. Trump is distracting everybody from this so he could just kind of sneak his policies in. And then on the flip side, we have the Democrats say they're trying to get the Green New Deal in. They throw the Green New Deal, they throw the word green in it, thinking it's some sort of environmental thing, and that's only a small aspect of it. There's a lot more to that plan than just about trying to save the environment. They're trying to sneak some of their other agendas in there too and get people excited about that. Messed up world. Marx's phrase, the opium of the people. Back in the day, it was religion that was the opium of the people, and now it's like technology, now it's some stuff like that, man. In the propaganda, today's dictators rely, for the most part, on repetition, suppression, and rationalization. The repetition of catchwords. Watch the last election. Happened over here. Repetition of catchwords, which they wish to be accepted as true. The suppression of facts, which they wish to be ignored. The arousal and rationalization of passion, which may be used in their interest of the party or the state. Repetition, hammering it home, man. That was it. Hitler's dictatorship differed in one fundamental point from all its predecessors in history. It was the first dictatorship in the present period of modern technical development, a dictatorship which made complete use of all technical means for the domination of its own country. Through technical devices like the radio and the loudspeaker, 80 million people were deprived of independent thought. It was thereby possible to subject them to the will of one man. This was Hitler, right? 1940s. Think about North Korea now, where they just have total control over what these kids read, what they see on television, what they hear on the radio, all that stuff. Total control. You're able to hammer these catchphrases, like they said in Brave New World, 42,000 things repeated, da-da-da-da-da. That's what's going on. All right. Back to the book. As he himself said, to be a leader means to be able to move the masses. Hitler's aim was first to move the masses and then, having pried them loose from their traditional loyalties and moralities, to impose upon them, with the hypnotized consent of the majority, a new authoritarian order of his devising. This is kind of going into Hitler's approach right now. Because keep in mind, he wrote this shortly after this Nazi Germany rise to power. The first principle from which he stated, this is Hitler, he started was a value judgment. The masses are utterly contemptible. They are incapable of abstract thinking and uninterested in any fact outside the circle of their immediate experience. Their behavior is determined not by knowledge and reason, but by feelings and unconscious drives. Hitler made his strongest appeal to those members of the lower middle classes who had been ruined by the inflation of 1923 and then ruined all over again by the Depression of 1929 and the following years. So he wanted to get those lower middle classes. That's where a majority of the people were, and that's who he used to kind of gain steam. Groups are capable of being as moral and intelligent as the individuals who form them. A crowd is chaotic, has no purpose of its own, and capable of anything except intelligent action and realistic thinking. Assembled in a crowd, people lose their powers of reasoning and their capacity for moral choice. So you put people in groups, and they lose their ability to think as individuals. In a word, a man in a crowd behaves as though he has swallowed a large dose of some powerful intoxicant. He's a victim of what I have called herd poisoning. It's true, man. You get people together in large crowds, and they start acting crazy. All effective propaganda, Hitler wrote, must be confined to a few bare necessities, and they must be expressed in a few stereotype formulas. These stereotype formulas must be constantly repeated, for only constant repetition will finally succeed in imprinting an idea upon the memory of a crowd. Brave New World all over again. In Hitler's world, the propaganda should adopt a systematically one-sided attitude towards every problem that has to be dealt with. He must never admit that he might be wrong or that people with a different point of view might be even partially right. Opponents should not be argued with. They should be attacked, shouted down, or if they become too much of a nuisance, liquidated. The morally squeamish intellectual may be shocked by this kind of thing, but the masses are always convinced that right is on the side of the active aggressor. Sounds an aggressive politician shooting down his opponents. Interesting. Marching diverts man's thoughts. Marching kills thought. Marching makes an end to an individuality. he had people march, and he had just people marching. It was a distraction again. That's all it was doing, distracting people from the issues. The survival of democracy depends on the ability of large numbers of people to make realistic choices in the light of adequate information. A dictatorship, on the other hand, maintains itself by censoring or distorting the facts and by appealing not to reason, not to enlightened self-interest, but to passion and prejudice, to the powerful hidden forces, as Hitler called them, present in the unconscious depths of every human mind. The unconscious depths now he's talking about passing into. So this guy was no dummy. He really knew how to move people. Granted, it was in a terrible direction. You would think maybe if he found something positive to do, what kind of change he could have had and made in this world. Can a campaign in favor of rationality be successful in the teeth of another and even more vigorous campaign in favor of irrationality? Don't know. Don't necessarily think it can. In his speeches, Hitler kept repeating such words as hatred, force, ruthless, crush, smash, and he would accompany these violent words with even more violent gestures. So getting into it, boom, making noises, getting the hands going, freaking out, doing all this kind of stuff, really got the people going. Watch some of his speeches, you think he's gonna like freaking kill somebody, man. Children, he adds, are living, talking records of what we tell them every day. And in due course, this is not Hitler talking, by the way, this is the book. Back to the book. And in due course, these living, talking records of television commercials will grow up, earn money, and buy the products of industry. Think of what it can mean to your firm in profits if you can condition 1 million or 10 million children who will grow up into adults trained to buy your product as soldiers are trained in advance when they hear the trigger words. Forward, march. So this is basically talking about the conditioning starting at a young age, the powerful elite having control over what you get, what you hear, and how they can control that and hopefully get a lifelong fan out of you. Both parties were told in 1956 by the editor of a leading business journal will merchandise their candidates and issues by the same methods that business had developed to sell goods. This is political stuff now. These include scientific selection of appeals and planned repetition. Radio spots, announcements, ads will repeat phrases with planned intensity. Billboards will push slogans of proven power. Candidates need, in addition to rich voices and good diction, to be able to look sincerely at the TV camera, looking at the camera, repeating catchphrases, speak sincerely. That was what it was about if you wanted to get elected. And now they're starting to understand this. This is 1950s. Think about how this has gotten refined over the years. Under the new dispensation, political principles and plans for specific action have come to lose most of their importance. The personality of the candidate and the way he is projected by the advertising experts are the things that really matter. How that person looks, how they hold, how they carry themselves, that's what people care about. There's been terrible people elected because of this, just because they look the part and you kind of believe in them. They don't look like, no offense to Bernie Sanders, but he's all slouched. He looks like the dude from Tales from the Crypt Keeper. Try to get behind that guy, man. You know, he doesn't get you moving, man. He doesn't get you fired up based off of his appearance only, solely by his appearance. All right, back to the book. Every man, like every dog, has his own individual limit of endurance. Most men reach the limit after about 30 days or more of less continuous stress under the conditions of modern combat. The more than average susceptible will succumb in only 15 days. The more than averagely tough can resist for 45 or even 50 days. Strong or weak in the long run, all of them break down. All, that is to say, of those who are initially sane. For, ironically enough, the only people who can hold up indefinitely under the stress of modern war are psychotics. Individual insanity is immune to the consequences of collective insanity. Interesting. Turning once again to Pavlov, he learns that on their way to the point of final breakdown, dogs become more than normally suggestible. New behavior patterns can easily be installed while the dog is at or near the limit of its cerebral endurance. And these new behavior patterns seem to be ineradicable. The animal in which they have been implanted cannot be deconditioned. That which it has learned under stress will remain an integral part of its makeup. So you stress the dog, stress the animal, teach it things, and it will be ingrained in that animal forever. Now we're going back to Hitler. Hitler was quite right in maintaining that mass meetings at night were more effective than mass meetings in the daytime. During the day, He wrote, "Man's willpower revolts with highest energy against any attempt at being forced under another's will and another's opinion. In the evening, however, they succumb more easily to dominating force and a stronger will. Like the dogs, humans are more suggestible in the evening, and once you're able to get that message into a suggestible mind, it is conditioned to stay there." That's what Huxley's saying anyway. Crazy stuff. Learning a lot by this dude. Fatigue increases suggestibility. That is why, among other reasons, the commercial sponsors of television programs prefer the evening hours. The same goes on. What Hitler did, the same is going on in the media right now. Or not right now, just in general. The daily Soma ration was an insurance against personal maladjustment, social unrest, and the spread of subversive ideas. Religion, Karl Marx declared, is the opium of the people. In the Brave New World, this situation was reversed. Opium, or rather Soma, was the people's religion. The daily drugs, that's what people became dependent upon. The same is true of the classical euphoric alcohol, the drug which, in the words of the psalmist, maketh glad the heart of man. But unfortunately, alcohol not only maketh glad the heart of man, but also in excessive doses causes illness and addiction, and has been a main source for the last 8,000 or 10,000 years of crime, domestic unhappiness, moral degradation, and avoidable accidents. Short term makes you happy, long term could lead to a life of awfulness. Back to the book. That a dictator could, if so desired, make use of these drugs for political purposes is obvious. He could ensure himself against political unrest by changing the chemistry of his subjects' brains and so making them content with their servile condition. So politicians could potentially drug up the masses, get them, mess with their brain chemistry, and get them to think the way that they want to think. It's like what the conspiracy theorists think about fluoride in the water. Fluoride's supposed to make you docile, make you more agreeable. There's people who believe that that's what's going on in America. Interesting, right? Back to the book. Nicknamed for some odd reason, the truth serum, pentothal, has been used by police of various countries for the purpose of extracting confessions. Around the same time of this book, the United States was using different drugs, LSD, things like that. They were trying to find a truth serum so that when they talk to these Soviets, when they talk to these people in other countries, they have hostages, they wanted to be able to give them a drug to get them to speak the truth. I don't know if anything ever happened, but I don't know if they ever found that truth serum per se, but they thought at one point in time it was pentothal, if that's how you pronounce it. Back to the book. The scientific dictator of tomorrow will set up his whispering machines and subliminal projectors in schools and hospitals. Children and the sick are highly suggestible, and in all public places where audience can be given a preliminary softening up by suggestibility increases oratory or ritual. So you got a bunch of people in a hospital, they're sick, they're going to be suggestible. You got a children's hospital, you could play stuff over the speaker, you could kind of get this stuff into people's brains, and you could create you can mold the brain into any direction that you want to mold it in. Back to the book, there is no reference in my fable to subliminal projection. It is a mistake of omission, which if I were to rewrite Brave New World today, I should most certainly correct. Subliminally adding things in, which, those little messages that you see where you're like, whoa, how did that happen? That is one aspect he thought he missed out. He hit 19 other things, but that one got to him. He didn't like missing that one. All right. In the late autumn of 1957, the Woodland Road Camp, a penal institution in Tulare County, California, became the scene of a curious and interesting experiment. Miniature loudspeakers were placed under the pillows of a group of prisoners who had volunteered to act as psychological guinea pigs. Each of these pillow speakers was hooked up to a phonograph in the warden's office. Every hour throughout the night, an inspirational whisper repeated a brief homily on the principles of moral living. Waking at midnight, a prisoner might hear this still, small voice extolling the cardinal virtues or murmuring, on behalf of his own better self, I am filled with love and compassion for all, so help me God. So they were trying to instill this softness into these prisoners just to see what happens. Kind of cool, kind of good idea. Mixed reviews on whether or not it actually did anything. So, back to the book. If only all of us, and not only the inmates of the Woodland Road Camp, could be effectively filled during our sleep with love and compassion for all. Wouldn't that be nice? You get that thing going on a loudspeaker, not a loudspeaker, sorry, a soft speaker into your brain. Whew, that would be cool. All right. Back to the book here. A number of pediatricians who instruct young mothers in the art of giving helpful suggestions to the children during the hours of light sleep. By this kind of hypnopedia, children can be cured of bedwetting and nail biting, can be prepared to go into surgery without apprehension, can be given confidence and reassurance when, for any reason, the circumstances of their life have become distressing. I, myself, have seen remarkable results achieved by the therapeutic self-teaching of small children. Comparable results could probably be achieved with many adults. Back to the book. As Pavlov demonstrated many years ago, strong-minded and resistant dogs become completely suggestible after an operation or when suffering from some debilitating illness. Our dictator will therefore see that every hospital is wired for sound, and appendectomy and a bout of pneumonia or hepatitis can be made the occasion for an intensive course in loyalty and the true faith of refreshment principles of the local ideology. Other captive audiences can be found in prisons, in labor camps, in military barracks, on ships at sea, on trains, airplanes, in the night, in the dismal waiting rooms of the bus terminals and the railway stations. Even if the hypnopedic suggestions given to these captive audiences were no more than 10% effective, the results would still be impressive for a dictator, highly desirable. Right? How about that, man? 10% would be great, especially in this country. But, all right, so, as Buddhists insist, most of us are half asleep all the time and go through life as, I'm not sure, man, somnambulists obeying somebody else's suggestions. Enlightenment is a total awakeness. Buddha can be translated as the wake. We talked about placebos in the past. A placebo is anything which the patient believes to be an active drug, but in fact is pharmacologically inactive. So these placebos have the ability to kind of control the mind somehow, some way. It changes the way that your mind thinks about what is happening, and you actually are cured and healed. About 30% of the patients never obtained relief from a placebo, right? On the other hand, 14% obtained relief after every injection of distilled water. The remaining 55% of the group were relieved by the placebo on some occasions, but not on others. We talked about in the past where it's like, anywhere from like 18 to 80% success rate with placebos. It's kind of nuts. B.F. Skinner of Harvard, insisting that a scientific explanation becomes more and more comprehensive, the contribution which may be claimed by the individual himself appears to be zero. Man's vaunted creative powers, his achievements in art, science, and morals, his capacity to choose and our right to hold him responsible for the consequences of his choice. None of these is conspicuous in the new scientific self-portrait. In a word, Shakespeare's plays were not written by Shakespeare, not even by Bacon or the Earl of Oxford. They were written by Elizabethan England. So the environment, the way that he was brought up, that's what molded that man into who he was. It is everything around you, taking it in. It's that butterfly effect situation. One small change, one small tweak anywhere along your path can set you on a different route. A study of behavior can, by itself, tell us almost nothing about the individual mind-body that, in any particular instance, is exhibiting the behavior. But to us who are mind-bodies, a knowledge of mind-bodies is of paramount importance. Bismarck and Lenin had died in infancy. Our world would be very different from thanks in part to what Bismarck and Lenin did, right? If those people didn't exist, we'd be living in a different situation right now, for good or for bad. All right, back to the book here. They will, unless prevented, make use of all the mind manipulating techniques. These are the powers that be at their disposal, and will not hesitate to reinforce these methods of non-rational persuasion by economic coercion and threats of physical violence. If this kind of tyranny is to be avoided, we must begin without delay ourselves and our children and our freedom. Had to take a quick little bathroom break. Going back to the book here, language has made possible man's progress from animal to civilized. But language has also inspired that sustained folly and that systematic, that genuinely diabolical weakness, which are no less characteristic of human behavior than are the language-inspired virtues of systematic forethought and sustained angelic benevolence. So language, again, guys, good or bad, man, it could be used either way. In their anti-rational propaganda, the enemies of freedom systematically prevent the resources of language in order to wheedle or stampede the victims into thinking, feeling, and acting as they, the mind manipulators, want them to think, feel, and act. An education for freedom and for the love and intelligence which are at once the conditions and the results of freedom must be, among other things, an education in the proper use of language. Individuals must be suggestible enough to be willing and able to make their society work, but not so suggestible as to fall helplessly under the spell of professional mind manipulators. So you want them to be agreeable, but not agreeable to everything, you know. There's got to be some pushback. There's got to be some fight, you know. We can't just say yes to everything. Moving on. It is perfectly possible for a man to be out of prison and yet not be free, to be under no physical constraint and yet to be a psychological captive, compelled to think, feel, and act as the representatives of the national state or of some private interest within the nation. Want him to think, feel, and act. There will never be such a thing as a right of habeas momentum, for no sheriff or jailer can bring an illegally imprisoned mind in a court. So if your mind's in prison, there's nothing you can do about it. You got to free that mind on your own. You can't just be, you're not going to be thrown in jail for being imprisoned, man, you know, mentally. That's on you to take care of. If the victim of mind manipulation does not know that he is a victim, the manipulated don't know they're being manipulated. That's how they end up getting manipulated. Huh? Makes sense, right? Obviously, we must, with all possible speed, reduce the birth... Oh, now we're going back to birth rate here. Sorry. Back to the book. We must reduce the birth rate to the point where it does not exceed the death rate. Overpopulation and over-organization have produced the modern metropolis, in which a fully human life of multiple personal relationships has become almost impossible. Almost impossible, right? Some of us can get it done, others cannot. I struggle with it, and I live in this small little town here. Recent public opinion polls have revealed that an actual majority of young people in their teens, the voters of tomorrow, this is 1950, by the way, have no faith in democratic institutions, see no objection in the censorship of unpopular ideas, do not believe the government of the people by the people is possible, and would be perfectly content if they could continue to live in the style to which the boom has accustomed them to be ruled from above by an oligarchy of assorted experts. I think this is even worse now than it was then. You know, man. Perfectly content, that's the problem. That is the problem, I think, with some people. And if they're writing about this, these are the young people in the 50s, so those people are in their 60s or 70s now. Those people in their 60s and 70s, no, older than that. Their kids are probably going through it now, and they're going through much, much worse than that. This is kind of one of my favorite quotes from the book. Any bird that has learned how to grub up a good living without being compelled to use its wings will soon renounce the privilege of flight and remain forever grounded. If we don't use our freedoms that we do have, they're going to be taken away from us, you know? Going back to the book, human beings cannot become fully human, and that freedom is therefore superiorly valuable. Perhaps the forces that now menace freedom are too strong to be restored very long. It is still our duty to do whatever we can to resist them. So whatever we got, I guess, whatever comes out of this, whatever I see like in this book, is that our fight for freedom, we got to keep it. We can't give it up. We can't let people control us. We can't let them control what we do every day, what we watch, all that other stuff. We got to go out there and seek things that we enjoy. We cannot be content. We cannot be controlled by some mind-altering substance. We cannot just fall in line and become an automaton. We cannot live in what Huxley talked about in 1932, Brave New World. And like that one quote, man, like that bird who becomes content with their day-to-day living, he doesn't even want to go out and fly and explore new terrain. There could be a wonderful, wonderful place to live right next door and he wouldn't even know it because he's content. The person of his dreams could be over there, doesn't even know it. And that's what I think this book is all about, kind of fighting the machine. Let's not accept our role as a cog in the machine. And let's keep kind of fighting that good fight, keep pressing forward. Whew! Time for me to get to work and start training some people. Thank you for watching this thing, Brave New World, and then Brave New World Revisited. 2 quick hitters, short books. You can kind of bang them out pretty quick. I'd recommend checking them out. You guys have any other suggestions, let me know. This thing's up on YouTube, which is what you're watching now. iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, it's out there, guys. Just search for it. If you see it on iTunes, give me a big like, give me a shout. Thank you. It's going to help boost us up a little bit. Same with YouTube. Leave a comment, leave a rating. Tell me how much you love it. Hope you guys have a great day. Peace.